Hello. Right. I think I'm live. I hope I'm live. Could somebody not troll me, please, and let me know in the comment section if it is the case. Right. I see someone saying it's frozen. So unless someone tells me otherwise, let me see. No, it seems to be fine where I'm streaming from and to. So I'm just going to continue on and let Jesus sort the rest of it out. I'm not sure how tech savvy he is, but we will soon find out. So for anybody who hasn't fallen asleep, because I'm waffling at this point, the gentleman to my right or left, I give up trying to work out how it's going to appear on the screen, is Robert Spencer. If you haven't heard of him, where have you been, darlings? What have you been doing? Like, come on now. So Jihad Watch. Also, just a list of books. That's potentially every book that Robert's written in the background of his screen at the moment. There's that many. And he has another one coming out on July 13th, which examines the historicity of Muhammad again, because there's that much stuff. So welcome, Robert. I finally got to the end of my intro. How are you?
Very well, thank you. And you?
I'm getting there. I'll take a breath in a minute whilst you're answering a question, presumably. With that in mind, I'm gonna ask you what I often what I've been pondering actually lately, the more involved I am with the internet, as it were. In your opinion, I mean, it's quite staggering to me the amount of articles you manage to produce just daily. I have a feed that hooks them in for me. And also I see them on Parler quite frequently. How do you feel that the internet has helped and hindered in the drive against Islamic Jihad?
Well, in the first place, it's been an incredible tool to raise awareness. It used to be that you would write a book, which I'm an old-fashioned person. I still write books. But people, I understand that most people don't read books. They prefer to watch videos. They can find online information about something they're interested in. And so if you take, for example, even Muslims being challenged in regard to the violence and hatred that is taught in the Islamic texts, you could go your whole life in previous ages and never be challenged in that way about those things. You just take them for granted as being from Allah, and that was all there was to it. And of course, there are many people who still feel that way, but at the same time, the internet has opened the whole world up so that in Saudi Arabia or Iran or Pakistan, with just a few clicks, you can find material that is absolutely mind-blowing and challenging to people who don't want to be in favor of a system and an ideology that mandates warfare and violence against those who are not inside the fold. And so that's been extraordinary. At the same time, of course, for a while it was like the Wild West. And in the 19th century in the United States, when the settlement of the Wild West was going on, it got the term wild, got the name wild, because there was very little legal superstructure. People tended to have to fend for themselves. So you had gunfights on the main street and all that sort of thing that we know from the movies. Now, that's how the internet used to be. There was all sorts of things everywhere that were not regulated. And so people said crazy things, people said true things, people said every shade of everything else in between, false and true. And at the same time now, you have a centralization and a crackdown on that wildness and openness, and people who have appointed themselves to be the arbiters of what can be said and what cannot be said. And so now we're coming into an age of censorship and totalitarian control that is aligned with the people, the powers that are bringing this about are aligned with the jihad force. Consequently, it's harder now to get information about jihad activity. Even my own site, Jihad Watch, I can give you a personal example. Jihad Watch for years, for many years, was on the top of Google's search if you searched for jihad. Not for Jihad Watch, of course it would be for that too, but just jihad. because what Google was doing was putting up the sites that were most congruent with the subject matter of what was being searched for and were most popular. And it was a popular site that talked about jihad. So when you searched for jihad, you would get Jihad Watch. A few years back, an imam in Texas, Omar Suleiman, demanded that Google change that because he said it was Islamophobic, and that true information about jihad should be put up front and center, by which, of course, he meant lies about jihad, articles about how Islam is a religion of peace and how nobody who reads the Quran would ever get the idea that harming anyone was justified, and all that sort of nonsense. And Google fell into line immediately, such that now when you search for jihad, you get page after page of apologetic Islamic material. Apologetic, of course, I mean in the sense of not of saying I'm sorry, but in the sense of trying to give reasoning for why it's really good what's being done. It's all the violence is justified, or it's not really there at all, or it's something else, or whatever. And Jihad Watch doesn't come up until, I don't even look, but I haven't looked in years. But last I looked, it was about page 10, and it's probably farther back now. This is all part of a larger initiative to bury the truth about Islam and jihad, and about Sharia oppression of women and other groups. And so the internet has been kind of a double-edged sword. It has raised awareness to a tremendous degree, but now it is being used to spread misinformation and disinformation about this crucial issue and others as well.
Yeah, I imagine, I mean, I'm not, I haven't looked into it too deeply, but I imagine potentially 100 years ago even, there could be, small groups of ultra militant jihadists in, I don't know, Africa, the Middle East, somewhere. And even though they may have their triumphs / massacres or, mass killings, they wouldn't get the pat on the back or the access to resources or the people doing apologetics for them or censoring the truth elsewhere, etc. And they may be forgiven for thinking that potentially they're out there alone, like flying the flag and doing whatever they're doing. So that's definitely a downside, that people, potentially young men who are just maybe getting into adolescence in their bedroom in like leafy suburbs of England can be watching directly jihadists who have grown up, maybe as child soldiers, or it's just, I mean, in that respect, it's a huge negative. However, I think that obviously, and the thing for search engines is Google isn't the only one. I just want to, for anybody who's unaware, it really isn't the only one. I don't use it because of its policies, and it's difficult to avoid it, to be honest. I don't scrutinize like the ingredients, as it were, or every site that I use, especially not YouTube. But there are other search engines available, but potentially on your website, you could have a chart and just track the decline, like the page numbers, see if you, how high, and then you can direct people to the correct page. But if they're on your website anyway, I guess they'll get around.
Yeah, they already have it.
Yeah, I'll put the link in the description box, because I love to promise things for the description box and then have a panic attack afterwards once I've forgotten what I promised. How important do you think Christianity is, A, in the struggle, no pun intended, against jihad, and B, in the struggle for the truth, to remain the truth and uncensored?
Well, it's an interesting thing. I recently did a show with a reporter in India, and she asked me the same thing in regard to Hinduism. And about secularism, we agreed, she and I, that if you don't really have any principles or beliefs of your own, it's very hard to rouse yourself to defend what you have if you don't count it as anything, if it doesn't have any content. In other words, a lot of people nowadays, they like to blame Christianity for the spread of Islam in Europe, because the Pope has trying to shame people into thinking that it's unchristian to oppose mass Muslim migration, and because Christianity does teach to welcome the stranger and give sanctuary to refugees, and so on and so on. That's all true. And yet it's also true, and I think overlooked by a lot of these critics, that when Europe was Christian in a much stronger way than it is now, then it stood up to the jihad and resisted it and drove the jihadis out of France and ultimately drove them out of Spain and also even drove them out of large portions of Eastern Europe that they had occupied. That was done sometimes explicitly under Christian auspices. And because of the idea that the Christianity called for defense for the sake of one's family and one's neighbors, for the defense of one's homeland. Nowadays, you have the Pope saying just the opposite, that one should not defend one's home, that it's unchristian, that one should turn over one's home to strangers who seize it from another land. And that's the Christian way. It's no wonder that people are upset with Christianity. But it was only when Europe discarded Christianity and became atheist to a tremendous degree that this all started, that the jihad started to be advancing in Europe and mass migration began. And I think it's the same thing as I was discussing with this lady in India. It's the same thing with Hinduism. If people have a sense of their own values, of their own heritage, of their own culture, and their own way of life as being something worth defending, then they'll defend it. But if they say that, well, no, our land is not really a land for our people. Our land is a land for anybody in the world who wants to be here and for any value system that they want to bring, then obviously you're not going to stand up and defend your land on that basis. You're going to think it's racist or bigoted or chauvinistic or whatever, Islamophobic to do so. And that's what we see in the West today. So Christianity, it seems to me, for Europe and for North America is absolutely central to the resistance to this. And this is one of the reasons why I think that the communist left that is in ascendancy in the United States now and in Europe as well is so anti-Christian and hostile, whereas it's not at all hostile to Islam, because Christianity lends itself to a free society, while Islam has always been the impetus for authoritarian regimes. There was only one non-authoritarian regime, and that was Turkey, secular Turkey, and secular Turkey is on its way out now. So, and it's re-Islamizing. So Islam lends itself to authoritarianism. If you're a bunch of authoritarians, that might be just the religion you want to encourage, whereas Christianity you want to stamp out. At very least, that's how the leftists who are in charge now are behaving.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something. I mean, they may be biting off more than they can chew if they're, non-theologically, like if they just want a religion that marries up with their views on the worth of people, basically, and how to get them all, pretty much like the Roman Empire. You just want people to do what you say when you say, and in large groups. I mean, Martin Luther, I've read and reread his stuff on the war on Islam, and I was like, is this really 500 years plus old? It sounded so awfully familiar. I mean, on one hand, it was strangely comforting that we hadn't progressed so far in those 500 years, that it hadn't, because it seems, I guess, to everybody who comes in, nobody kind of stumbles into the air, like the topic, the subject area. You kind of like get a sharp shock, and then you realize how much we're deceived in the West with the mainstream just not covering, for example, Christian persecution, but, ad nauseum covering stuff and slandering people and painting them in a light that they must be these trigger words. They must be racist. Like you said, Islamophobic, that's a joke. But so in terms of foreign policy, so Martin Luther wrote that. Speaking of the pontiff, as it were, have you found within the last, month, since the trip to the Middle East during Corona, let's not go there, do you find that now the increased Catholic awareness of Christian persecution, at least, has that changed anything for you? Because
not that I've seen.
No.
Maybe I missed it, but it seems to me it didn't accomplish anything. As I wrote at the time, that those kinds of meetings are all just about making everybody who's participating feel good. That's all they do. The Pope, of course, is on record saying that authentic Islam and the proper reading of the Quran reject every form of violence, which is flatly false. And to say such a thing is actively misleading to people and is dangerous because it makes them complacent in the face of an advancing threat that does not have their best interests at heart. And so, you know, there was a lot of high hopes about his trip to Iraq, and the Christians in Iraq who have suffered terribly, saying that they were going to move back, some of them who had left, and they had high hopes that this was going to be the end of the persecution. I'm afraid that I certainly wish them well, and I hope they're right, but I'm afraid they might not be, because the Shiites, the Pope met with the Shiite leader, Ayatollah Sistani. The Shiites invented the idea of taqiyya, of deception of those who are outside the fold, deception in order to advance the protection and strength of the religion itself. Taqiyya is a very central Shiite concept, and so it's very hard to say that. I know people will say, "Oh, see, you're a racist, bigot, Islamophobe because of this," but look, if somebody has a doctrine,
get the Quran verse down now, if anyone's in any doubt.
Yeah, 328. If somebody has a doctrine that says you can lie to people and that that's good under certain circumstances, and then you have a guy who is dedicated his life to spreading this doctrine, and then you suggest maybe he's not telling the truth, then it's your fault and you're an Islamophobe. But really, it's just common sense.
Suspicious mind you have, such a cynic. How could you? Someone's lying day after day. Yeah. Do you think, without going too sort of sectarian, do you think that it's possible, because of the Pope's age, like physically, and the fact that he's kind of cloistered in the West, as it were, do you think there's even a slim chance that he's genuinely unaware of things such as taqiyya, things such as Surah 929? You know, do you think he's that like cut off from? I mean, lots of people are. It's a forgivable situation.
Yeah, I wouldn't be in the least. I would be very surprised if I were to learn that the Pope had actually ever opened up a Quran and read even part of it. I'd be very surprised if he had ever made any kind of study of Islam. What I expect happened, what I think is almost certain to have happened, was that he was told by At-Tayyib, the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, the Grand Sheikh of Al-Azhar, Ahmed At-Tayyib, he was told by At-Tayyib or somebody that authentic Islam and the proper reading of the Quran reject every form of violence, and he put it down in his document, his apostolic exhortation. I think that whoever told him, whether it was a Catholic so-called expert on Islam or whether it was a Muslim leader that he's been dealing with, they probably knew that what they were telling him was false, but they hoped that he would propagate it, and he did. I think that he's very happily serving as a useful idiot for very nefarious forces.
I think that's probably a relief for Catholics if they go along with that concept, because I know there's been talk how, you know, how genuine it is of like some sort of merging of religions. And I wonder, does the Pope realize that, you know, Isa is not crucified in the, like all of these little, you know, I could write to him actually. His address is known in the public sphere. Anyone else who's watching can write to him with some verses.
You'll never see any letter like that. It'll be circular filed long before it gets to him.
Well, we can pray for him then. I don't know how strong the defences are around the Vatican for that sort of thing. Maybe it'll be magnified by all the pilgrims there. Let me come on to another question before I say something that I don't want to about a Christian. Are there trends in jihad? I don't mean like colour arrangements and hairdos, but are there broad trends? That would just be too good. But yeah, are there broad trends? And if so, is anything in particular in vogue at the moment, or do they come and go? Like, you know, is it like flares, for example? Do they just go off and then come back in style again?
Yeah, sure, there are trends. For example, a few years back, ISIS, the Islamic State, published a call for vehicular attacks, saying, run them over with your car. If you don't have a gun and you don't have a knife, run them over with your car. And there was a spate of such attacks. There were some in Britain, there were some in America, there was one in Ohio, there have been many in Germany, there were some in Israel.
I think, yeah.
And there was one just recently, I don't remember where it was, but it wasn't that long ago. But it was the first one for a while. And I think that there was a vogue for that sort of thing for a while, and then it died down, which is not to say we'll never see it again by any means. And the knifings, it's the same thing. There was a spate of people knifing random people on the street, which also happened in Britain and elsewhere.
We have that daily.
Yeah.
Just London, at least 7 people have been stabbed pretty seriously in the last week. It's just, but they're not, there's no indication that it's anything to do with Islam. Mainly it's to do with, I don't know, young people and knives. So
yeah, well, that's one thing, but certainly there was a time when jihadis were encouraging that sort of attack, and then we saw a good bit of it. Yep.
So, funnily enough, we were just speaking before I pressed the button, as it were. I saw a thing just slide across my newsfeed about Afghanistan. It was reported today, another car bomb. The word "another" wasn't in the title, but when I tried to Google it, I've got a copy of it open anyway, but just so many different car bombings in Afghanistan in the last, like a month ago, 5 months ago, 6 months ago. Do you think that Ramadan is, do you think it's hunger? What is it that makes it a kind of, I don't know, is it just that we notice it more, or are the numbers actually higher for those?
The numbers are higher. There's more jihad in Ramadan. Ramadan is the month of jihad, because jihad is the struggle, right? That's what the word means. Yeah. And it's the struggle to impose Islam, to serve Allah, which means to obey his commands, which means to obey his commands to make war against unbelievers and subjugate them. And what is Ramadan? Ramadan is the month in which Muslims are supposed to redouble their faith in Allah, to work harder than usual to please him. Muhammad in a hadith was asked, what is a deed greater than jihad? And Muhammad said, I do not find such a deed. So what better time to do the greatest deed of all, jihad, than Ramadan? Ramadan being the month in which you were trying to serve Allah, and the best way to serve Allah is jihad. So you're going to see more jihad in Ramadan.
And yet it's portrayed, shock horror, incorrectly as it were, as some sort of time of, I don't know, like penance or quiet reflection, or denying yourself, feasting in the evening certainly, but it's just bizarre. Very recently, some American foreign policies have been, I don't know about overturned, but they've been Bidenized, as it were. Trump was getting on pretty well, as far as as a superficial observer I can see, for certain, Israel and their kind of ties within the Middle East. Do you agree, at least, that foreign policy for countries such as Britain and America should recognize regimes that uphold or turn a blind eye to Christian persecution? Not necessarily, although often, 7 of the top countries for persecution are Islamic. But do you think
that's something I advocated years ago, that countries, the United States now, especially under this regime that's in power now, the United States hands out money like it has a bottomless supply, and that it will never run out. And a lot of it goes to regimes that are not our friends and not going to be our friends. And some of them are actively abetting jihad activity, like Pakistan. And so I had years ago said that there should be no aid given to any country where Christians are persecuted, where anybody else is persecuted. Iran persecutes the Baha'is, then they don't get any aid either. They don't have a nuke deal, nothing until they have a spotless human rights record. And I mean, I know we have to live in the real world. I understand that. We have to play realpolitik. We have to deal with the fact that none of these regimes are perfect. That is true. But it would certainly go a long way toward ending the persecution of Christians if there was some accountability for it. And if they knew that they would suffer financially if they did it, then I think you'd see a very different situation in Pakistan and elsewhere.
Yeah, I was stunned very recently. I think it was this year, although this lockdown is kind of like, it seems like one long day really. But Britain, they at least made noises and said that they would withhold foreign aid to Nigeria. And what stunned me was that they actually referenced Christian persecution in their reasoning, whether they just mean a cut in pocket money or whether they mean, complete withholding of funds and stuff like that. I was pretty encouraged, and then nothing really changed at all. I don't know. This is the thing. On the surface, they can happily say, yep, we're not giving any money anymore. And years down the line, the accounts all come to light and it's just funneled, through somewhere else.
I tell you, I'm not even allowed in your lovely country. And so maybe
it's
an outrage. Maybe it's out of line for me to say, but I think the Boris Johnson administration is absolutely the most inexcusable, appalling, outrageous betrayal of the British people. That he ran on one thing and now he's flipped and doing the other. People voted for him because they didn't want Corbyn, and then he became Corbyn. And it's just absolutely astonishing. And I'm sorry that you don't have any genuine political alternative.
Yeah, I was going to say, though, have you seen Keir Starmer? I mean, I'm pretty thick-skinned. I can take criticism. Like, we have a two-horse race base in effect, unless you count, like, the Scottish National Party, like, 5 people heckling in the corner. But it really is the word. At least we have vocal Christians in the Conservative Party who are unapologetic in their stance on, for example, abortion or things like that. But, COVID aside, I'm sure he was busy having it and then making silly comments about it and then overseeing
But every day I put up a story at Jihad Watch. 100 more migrants arrive across the English Channel.
Oh,
300 more across the English Channel. And he's not doing anything but putting them up in hotels.
Yeah. Well, what you'll find is that if I could be bothered, it's a long walk home. But if I were to go there with my camera phone, there have certainly been people who've done that. They will be chastised, COVID or not, for recording the information. So you're thinking, hold on a second. It's one thing to absolutely accept that George Orwell was some sort of prophet, like he knew what was coming. And yet, it's another thing to actively, with the acquiescence of all of these government agencies, forcefully try to prevent the truth from reaching the people who are going to vote you in, if voting's to be believed, like if it's not all rigged from the off. I think it's stunning that whilst there are genuine people in genuine need, and Christians who, I've just got to tell you, I know that but the people watching, there was a case, there have been a few actually, but there was one case, I believe he was a Pakistani Muslim, he apostatized, he became a Christian after his apostasy. He then either presented himself or wrote to the British embassy where he was. And this is the kicker, on headed notepaper. So as a representative of Her Majesty and the government, whoever it was wrote back and said something along the lines of, we don't accept your premise that the Bible, that Christianity is a peaceful religion, and literally quoted the Old Testament in an, Islamic polemics kind of way almost. Also, they said, well, now that you have a newfound faith in Jesus, maybe just trust God and get on with it where you are, like you're not coming in. So don't take it personally, really, that you're not allowed here, because people in desperate need with their lives in danger are also treated appallingly. We were told that we couldn't possibly accept Asia Bibi because maybe we wouldn't be able to ensure her safety. If she'd have put on a burqa, like, or a niqab, she'd have been absolutely fine. Like, no one would have known. Anyway, I'll stop ranting at my own government. But yeah, if anybody wants to email the Foreign Office and just ask them some polite questions as to their reasoning as why Robert and a few other Americans actually are not welcome on these shores, then that would be interesting to see your results. Okay, so right. So do you think it's for example, Boko Haram, I think, or ISWAP, their stats, as it were, in the league table, they kill 60% of their kills are Christians and 40% are other people who would call themselves Muslims. They don't see them, I don't think, as Muslims, but they are Muslims. Do you think it's almost even, like when we look at it globally, is it, I know that Christianity is definitely the most persecuted religion, although it's not all obviously Islamically led. Do you think it's quite evenly distributed between Muslims being killed by jihad and Christians, or like is it a steep?
I think that it's very clear that the Fulani and the Boko Haram and the Islamic State West Africa province all target Christians. They only target Muslims who they consider to be, as you noted, considered to be heretics or apostates, those who have rejected their authority and so on. But they really want to drive the Christians out of Nigeria altogether. And so it's much more of a question of persecution of Christians. The fact that there are Muslims who have been persecuted is undeniable, but it's used in misleading fashion, because people say, see, they attack mosques, they attack Muslims, they're not Muslims, when actually they consider the people they're attacking to be heretics, and so under the death penalty for heresy or apostasy. And so it's because they're Muslims that they're attacking these other people that they don't consider to be sufficiently Muslim. But their primary target is very clearly the Christians.
And do you think that will ever, I mean, we've had 1400 years to wait, I guess. The one potential reform just made it stricter again, like it was a regressive reformation, like Wahhabism and stuff like that. I don't know, do you think that there'll ever be a bigger target, not even just for jihad, but for the mainstream and like this bizarre leftish sort of narrative than Christianity? Like, can you see a time when maybe they just get over it, or they go full circle and start targeting like actual minorities again, if that makes it, like, I don't know why we have to have a victim, as it were, but do you think Christians will ever be able to get down off the cross, as it were?
I don't know the future, but I can tell you that the left wants to destroy the West. So it wants to destroy Britain, destroy the United States, destroy France, destroy Germany, and so on. And that means destroy the Judeo-Christian tradition that gave rise to the civilization in which we live. And then they will have it easier in their attempts to establish the state that they want to establish, apparently a Marxist state. And as I noted before, Islam lends itself to that kind of authoritarianism in a way that Christianity does not. So I think that as long as they're Christians, they will continue to persecute them. It's going to get a lot worse in the West. Now, of course, under the excuse of COVID, we've seen the precedent being set that churches can be shut and fenced around and police keeping people from going in. We haven't seen remotely the last of that. We've just seen the beginning of it.
Yeah, I think that potentially, I don't know, I've thought of it a couple of times, that Marxism, when you look at it on a pretty superficial level, it's not really my area of expertise, but other than their open hostility towards like theism, it's pretty Islamic already. Like there's some merging of ideologies anyway. The kind of just one at the top and everyone else on the bottom kind of, there's no like steep tower of like, meritocracy or anything like that. It's just the masses being controlled by the few.
Well, there is a tremendous convergence, a tremendous harmony between Marxism and Islam that is based on their vision of the perfect society. Christianity, and this is another reason why they want to stamp it out, says that you'll never have a perfect society on earth, that there is no, because of the reality of sin in every human heart, you're never going to have a perfectly just society. Whereas Marxism says, yes, you'll have a just society on earth, the dictatorship of the proletariat. And the dictatorship of the proletariat, whenever Marxists have taken power and tried to impose it, they have ended up doing so by a reign of terror.
Yeah.
It's the perfect society, the just society, that they'll kill you if you get out of line. And so it's the same thing in Islam. Sharia is also the perfect society on earth. And when Sharia is imposed, that is, as far as Muslims are concerned, the perfectly just society insofar as it is fully imposed. But then what if you get out of line? Then you're stoned to death, or your hand is amputated, or whatever else, you're beheaded, whatever else that is the prescribed punishment for what you've done. So both Marxism and Islam have a vision of a perfect society here on earth enforced by a reign of terror. So that's why they're brothers.
What's bizarre is that, I don't know if I could say this for Marxists, because they're usually so far gone that there's little ground to actually communicate. Like, it just seems very hysterical lately, like anything that's sort of born of Marxism. But I don't know about the majority, but for example, I've spoken to many Muslims who've said, who my daughter, 9 years old? Oh, no. Like, been quite open about, I wouldn't do that. And it's rare, actually, maybe for bravado, but it's rare that I speak to a Muslim who says, oh, Sharia, love it. I'd love to have it in my area, and we'll just do a test scheme. Just have it in my few streets, really. We'll see how the beheadings go, and we'll let you guys know. Like, nobody, not in their right mind, that's not the right phrase, but nobody seems to voluntarily request it. It seems, as in Marxism, to be imposed from the top down. I wonder how they've gotten away with this propaganda, like how this, I mean, obviously if you leave, you can be killed and like stuff like that, but I don't know how they get away with everyone just going, oh, is this how it is now? Okay. Oh, we're in Iran, are we? Oh, the 70s are finished. Okay, then let's all just is it just fear, do you suppose? And is it because Christianity is, founded on love, that's why it's such a threat, because it casts out fear perfectly?
Well, that's another thing. Islam is based on fear. Islam is all about fear. And it's not just fear that your hand will be amputated. I tell you, I had a friend who worked in Saudi Arabia for a few years, and he said that everybody, when they had the call to prayer, would get up and leave their businesses and go to the mosque. And even the jewelry stores were right there open with the door wide open and nobody inside. But everybody knew nobody's going to steal anything because they were afraid. They were afraid that they'd get their hand cut off, not because it's a virtuous society. It's a society based on fear. And all of Islamic law is based on fear because of the great punishments that come. And then there's also the eschatological fear. In Iran, the Islamic Republic came in, like you noted, and made the women wear hijab. And there were a lot of protests. You can see pictures online of thousands, tens of thousands of Iranian women protesting against having to be forced to wear the hijab. But in the first place, they were looking at 10 to 20 years in prison, and torture in prison, rape in prison. And then also, they were told by the mullahs that if you don't wear the hijab, you're going to be hanged upside down by your hair in hell and roasted there and tortured forever for not wearing your hijab. So you see, it's all fear. of different kinds, but it's a very powerful motivator, fear.
Yeah, I think potentially you've hit on it. I mean, I'm not so sure, at least where I, like London and England, but I think that, like I'm researching some stuff from, Reformation times and prior to that, which is the 16th century and before. And what I think is that even though I used to mistakenly presume that these people were somehow less, I don't know, like maybe less emotionally intelligent or less actually intelligent because of the things that were, maybe potentially people looking back on this era are going to be like, how could they be so stupid? Why would they allow that? But certainly hell was it was a universal, and it was believed, I would say, almost like, across the board by the peasants and the aristocracy alike. Everybody knew the reality of it, and therefore some things went by without question, the authority of the clergy and stuff like that. I'm wondering, maybe because Islam is, 600 years younger at least than Christianity, maybe they're just still in that phase of, I don't know, like very vivid theological imaginations, as it were. I can't see the control mechanism other than fear and murder.
There
and
isn't
if
any.
that's the case, but then wouldn't you run at the very first opportunity? Maybe not tell anyone, maybe stand still while you're running, but just apostatize and maybe keep it quiet until you're safe.
No, because what if it's your family, it's your friends, it's the area you live in. Where are you going to run? You're going to go and run and live with strangers who don't care anything about you and don't know you?
Maybe 300 a day at Dover. I don't know. I mean, I'm just throwing it out there.
They're going to come to Britain and live in Muslim areas. I was in Britain last in 2009, and I took a long walk through London, and there were some areas you would think you were in Karachi. And that was over 10 years ago.
Yeah. I'll take some photos. There's more. Next time I'm jogging through, because now maybe I should walk a bit quicker in those places.
But in any case, it's not just that it's 600 years younger, because the core teachings are different. Christianity doesn't have doctrines calling for warfare against unbelievers. And Islam doesn't have forgiveness and redemption.
That's true.
If you don't have forgiveness and redemption, chapter 21, verse 47 of the Quran says, if your good deeds outweigh your bad deeds, you go to paradise. If your bad deeds outweigh your good deeds, you go to hell. You don't know how much your deeds weigh, and you don't know how many you've got of each. So that is, and it's just
rigged anyway, because Allah's going to guide who he guides and misguides who he misguides.
Yes.
I think they're not the same people. I think it's like one lot get the snakes and the others get the ladders. And I think that's kind of it, basically.
Allah leads astray those whom he wills. Chapter 10, verse 99, 32, verse 13, says that Allah he says, I could have guided everyone, but instead I'm going to fill hell with jinns and men.
Oh, and women. Don't forget the women who are referenced.
He says just men, but yes, most women, most of the people in hell are women. That's from a hadith. So the thing is,
it's a figure, are you?
In Christianity, it teaches, what is it in the New Testament? God desires all men to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. Now, that's direct contradiction to the idea that, well, I could have guided everyone, but instead I'm going to fill hell with human beings. So it's a very different theological sensibility. And of course, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, versus Muhammad is the apostle of Allah, those who follow him are merciful to one another and ruthless to the unbelievers, which is chapter 48, verse 29.
It's literally the opposite. The New Testament says, what good is it being kind to, like, even thieves are nice to each other. Like, what benefit is that?
There you go.
It's hard to pray for those who curse you, obviously. Yeah.
So I don't think in 600 years this is going to be sorted out, because the Quran will still say what it says now. And so anybody who believes it is still going to think he needs to hate unbelievers and wage warfare against them.
Just dashed my hopes and dreams there, Robert. Thanks. Everyone get the out.
We have to start from reality and work to where we want to be, but we can't pretend things are other than what they are. That doesn't do any good at all.
No. What I think is desperately needed is just I'm just dropping anvil-sized hints into the chat, is like lots and lots of prayer. It sometimes still feels a bit counterintuitive when I say it when I'm doing my persecution stuff. But if we don't pray for Boko Haram or ISWAP or ISCAP, who's going to? Basically, there'll be pointless prayers if they're Islamic anyway. What we need, the reason you have to pray for your enemies is so they get a dose of, the scales being removed and like a forcible waking up, not in a woke way. But obviously, if they come out of this delusion, less chance of them persecuting just for fun, as it were, rather than for ideologies. Right. I think maybe I've come to a natural pause, other than to ask you one, your new book, if you just want to give me like a short, intro as if I didn't already know. And the other thing, if this book, if between you and Jay Smith and obviously the Holy Spirit, if there was a mass, exodus, as it were, from Islam, what would you do with your time? So there's two things. What's the book? And what would you do if it was massively successful in terms of the theology of Muslims?
Well, I'm not making any plans, but the book is Did Muhammad Exist? Revised and Expanded Edition. It is a study of the origins of Islam, showing that the basis for the common view of Muhammad is actually quite shaky, that there are a lot of reasons to think he's more legend than reality. I wrote this book 10 years ago, but there is so much that has come out in this field since then. I was able to write a revised edition, 25% new material, and it'll be out in July. You can see on the screen, actually, I'm not quite sure how to point to it. It's over here. The case there is a soprano saxophone, and that's what I would be doing if I weren't doing this.
Wow, that's a brilliant answer. And you've got the visual evidence, potentially gathering dust, because you're always just typing out.
Well, I used to play every day assiduously, and then I got too busy doing this. So maybe one day. Okay,
so July 13th, it can be pre-ordered basically where they sell good books. Even Google will help you find that place, as it were. So I'm going to say thank you very much. I haven't been following the live chat, unfortunately, but I imagine if there are any questions, I'll forward them on to you. And next time we speak, those will be top of the agenda.
Okay.
So for everybody else, please do go to jihadwatch.com. Don't bother with Google at all, really. Just type www. or https / something along those lines, and jihadwatch.com at the top, and you will see reams and reams and archives and more reams of just solid, literally, it seems never ending, hard work of Robert's just keeping up with these nutters who are in an area near you or coming to an area near you soon. So apart from that, God's sovereign, so don't have nightmares, etc. Pray for all the nutters. The jihadis is who I mean by that. Just generic nutters as well, if you like. And I'm going to do a premiere very soon in an hour. Anyone who's hanging around because they have no life and it's Friday, like me. So God bless. Thank you very much, Robert, for coming.
Thank you.
We'll both see you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay.